Onyancha.
Philip.
Scarf.
This
Philip
was the
Onyancha.
16th crime scene Onyancha had exposed.
Yeah.
How long was it?
Yeah, since 2008.
That's when.
Towards the end of 2008. Yeah. November 2008. Up to now.
Is this the last victim you've shown the police?
No, this is the last one. Yeah. It's just the same case like this one. Yeah.
Where is it?
Yeah, it's in Westlands. Riverside Drive.
At the person's home and
Yeah. Opposite to the German embassy. There's a Muda Wari's place. Muda Wari's brother property. Yeah.
what happened?
I was working there and just met a lady and then confessed her. Took her into the house. By that time it was empty.
Nairobi, June 2010. A phone rings in a modest home in the suburb of Dagoretti. A father, desperate, has been waiting weeks for this call. His 9-year-old son, Anthony, vanished from the streets outside their home 2 months earlier. Now a voice on the line names a price. The father does exactly as he's told. He loads money onto an M-Pesa mobile wallet and sends it to a stranger's number, praying it will bring his boy home. It doesn't. Anthony is already dead and has been for weeks. But the money leaves a trail, and that trail, a string of digits moving from one phone to another, is about to unravel the quiet, ordinary life of a 32-year-old security guard named Philip Onyancha, and expose him as the man Kenya would come to call its first serial killer. This is his story. The promising boy who lost himself, the killer who claimed spirits made him do it, and the convict who says he found God in a cell inside Kamiti Maximum Security Prison.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Dark Echoes. I'm sorry for the long hiatus. Burnout knocked me out, but I'm fully back now and grateful for your understanding and support.
Every silence
If you're
has a
new,
story.
hit subscribe and turn on notification. Drop a like, comment, welcome back below, and share this with fellow true crime fans. It helps the channel grow massively. Today we're diving into the disturbing story of Philip Onyancha, the Kenyan security guard with the so-called magic handshake who confessed to nearly 20 murders, drank his victims' blood for power, ran a heartbreaking ransom scheme on grieving families, and now claims he found God behind bars, while the courts still haven't convicted him of a single killing after 15 years. This one gets dark fast. Stick around. I'm your host, Cybel.
Every silence has a story.
To understand how deeply Onyancha's crime cut into Kenya's society, you have to start with the people he took. Catherine Chelagat was a 32-year-old, a mother of one, who had just finished a course at the Kabete Technical Institute in Nairobi. On a Sunday evening in early November 2008, she left a relative's house in the leafy Nairobi suburb of Karen, telling him she was headed to spend the night with her brother. She never arrived. For 3 months, her family had nothing. Then came a phone call demanding money, paid quietly through M-Pesa. It didn't matter. Catherine had already been dead for months by the time anyone asked for a ransom. She wasn't alone. In Thika, an industrial town roughly an hour north of Nairobi, sex workers began dying in cheap lodging houses. Helen Nyambura's body lay undiscovered in a rented room for days in January 2010 before anyone raised the alarm. Her killer, it will later emerge, had returned to look at her body nearly a dozen times before it was found. A week later, 25-year-old Jacqueline Wambui met a client at a motel called the Suitable Lodging House. She was found the next morning, her neck broken. Years afterward, in an interview from prison, Onyancha would casually admit to another detail that still unsettles people who hears it. When police finally arrived to remove one victim's body from a crime scene, he had been standing right there among the onlookers who'd gathered to watch, listening for any hint of what the investigators knew or whether his name was about to surface. Then there were children. Samuel Wanyonyi, a boy who'd moved to Nairobi to attend a good school, vanished in mid-2009. Ransom notes arrived, then stopped, and the boy was never seen again. Throughout the search that followed, a local man volunteered again and again to help the search parties combing the neighborhood for the missing boy, even offering the grieving family his own theory that the handwriting on the ransom note looked like a woman's. That man was Philip Onyancha. He had killed Samuel already. He simply hadn't been caught yet. In April 2010, 9-year-old Anthony Muiruri disappeared from Dagoretti. It was his family's ransom payment, tracked through Kenya's mobile money network, that would finally bring the killer's name into the light. By the time it was over, at least 17 people, by some counts close to 19, would be linked to a single man. Most were women, several were children. All of them, in the killer's own telling, had been weak and vulnerable. An easy, chilling arithmetic he used to explain why he chose them. None of the victims' families knew each other. None of the crime scenes scattered across Nairobi, Thika, Nyeri, and Nakuru seemed connected.
Onyancha has dominated news headlines since last Sunday, and when he got to Dagoretti corner, his presence was electric. There were mixed reactions here as residents were filled with both anxiety and fear of seeing him. Onyancha's mission here, though, was brief, just to identify the spots where he killed some of his victims.
Philip Onyancha was born in 1978 in Western Kenya near Kericho to Samuel and Esther Onyancha, tea farmers whose land still produces leaves today. By every early account, he was unremarkable, even promising child. At Changoi Primary School, his headmaster wrote on his admission paper that he was a well-behaved boy of above-average ability. It was enough to win him a place at Kenyatta Mahiga High School in Nyeri, nearly 300 kilometers from home, one of the country's better secondary school and a serious opportunity for a boy from a rural tea farming family. In his first years there, Form 1, teachers remembered him fondly. He was articulate. He played sports. His English teacher would later describe him as an eloquent, confident student who spoke with real authority for his age. He seemed, by every measure available to the adults around him, headed somewhere good. Then in the second year, something changed. Onyancha was accused of bullying younger students, and more specifically of an act of sexual violence against a younger boy. The claims was investigated half-heartedly, found nothing conclusive, and after a 2-week suspension, Onyancha was allowed to return to class. But the boy who came back was not the boy who left. Teachers who had once praised his energy now described someone who had lost his spark entirely. Quiet, sullen, easily angered, no longer interested in the athletic and clubs that had defined his early days at the school. Around the same time, students and staff at Kenyatta Mahiga began quietly trading rumors about occult activities somewhere on the school margin, the kind of half-believed gossip that exists at every boarding school, but which would later take on a much darker significance. Onyancha started his final secondary school in 1998 and passed with a middling grade, but strangely he never collected the certificates. He later resat the exam at a different school. Rather than pursuing further education, he entered the workforce as a security guard, eventually being posted around the country by a private firm. He would later claim that he left his home village around this time not because of the scandals, but because he had begun hearing voices. Voices, he said, that had started back in his school years and had only grown louder, more insistent, more difficult to ignore.
By the mid-2000s, Onyancha had married a woman named Lydia Nyaboke. They settled into a small, crowded one-bedroom home in Nairobi, shared with in-laws, and in 2008, they had a son. To his wife, Onyancha was, for years, simply her husband, a man who went to work at a security firm and came home. But something had begun to shift. He started disappearing at odd hours. He grew evasive about where he's been. In mid-2009, worried and suspicious, Lydia finally confronted him, wondering aloud if he had a second family somewhere. He denied it and insisted he remained devoted to her and the son. To his neighbors, he was simply strange, a man who kept to himself except for unsettling outbursts. He once got the power to an entire block over a minor grievance, and when confronted, threatened to have the complainer killed. People noticed too, a small growth on the back of his skull, slowly swelling to the size of an orange over the very years his behavior seemed to be cuddling. Nobody connected the dots, not yet. By early 2010, Onyancha, now 32, had begun missing shifts at his security job without explanation. In March of that year, his employer had had enough and fired him. He would not stay unemployed for long. He had, by then, another occupation entirely, one that had already claimed more than a dozen lives. Onyancha's method, when he later described it to police and journalists, sounded almost too simple to be believed. He said he would approach a woman on the streets, often someone walking alone, often someone he judged to be poor or vulnerable, and simply greet her. A handshake, a few words. He claimed that something about his contact left his victim disoriented, compliant, willing to follow him to a quiet or private place where he would strangle them. In several cases, he said, he drank a small amount of the blood afterward, believing it granted him supernatural strength that made each subsequent kill easier than the last. He told reporters, chillingly, that on one occasion in Nairobi, he'd managed to make a woman follow him with words alone. But because he hadn't shaken her hand, she managed to break free and survive. When the magic touch was real in any sense beyond his own delusion, or simply how a predator explained his ability to manipulate frightened, desperate people, is something investigators, psychiatrists, and the Kenyan public would argue about for the next decade. What's certain is that it worked often enough and for long enough that nobody in Nairobi, Thika, or Nyeri had any reason to connect a security guard with a wife and infant son to a string of unresolved deaths spanning half a decade. His targets were rarely random acquaintances, sex workers in cheap lodges, women walking alone at dusk, children easy to overpower, easy to hide, and useful, he discovered, for a second and far more lucrative purposes: ransom. Onyancha didn't just kill, he kidnapped children, held them for weeks or sometimes months, and then sent ransom notes to grieving, hopeful families demanding payment through the M-Pesa mobile money. The cruelty of it was almost administrative. Families would receive a note, a phone number, an amount. Some paid immediately, some negotiated the price down when they couldn't afford it. In every single case, the child they were paying to save was already dead, sometimes for months, by the time the money changed hands. For nearly 2 years, this pattern held. Bodies turned up in attics, in sewer drains, behind lodging houses, in isolated bush, and were filed again and again as isolated tragedies, a suicide here, an unresolved death there, a missing person never found. Nairobi's crime pages logged them individually. Nobody yet was looking at the pattern. It was the money that finally betrayed him. When Anthony Muiruri's family paid their son's ransom in mid-2010 following the demands left at the Dagoretti home,
police were able to do something they couldn't with earlier cases. Trace the M-Pesa transaction through Safaricom calls and transfer records back to a specific phone number and from there to a specific man. When they compared a handwritten ransom note recovered at the scene of Anthony's abduction to samples of the man's handwriting, the match was unmistakable. On June 5th, 2010, police arrested Philip Onyancha. At first, it looked like a single tragic kidnapping for ransom case, upsetting but contained. Within a day, that assumption collapsed entirely. He confessed, calmly, according to those in the room, almost proudly, to killing nearly 20 people. He recalled locations, dates, methods with an unsettling clarity that investigators had rarely encountered. He told them about a cult he had said he'd been recruited into as a teenager at Kenyatta Mahiga High School by a female teacher who he claimed had drugged him, cut him, taken his blood and bound him to her will through what he described as black magic. He said the cult demanded 100 kills before he would be granted true power and riches. He said he had managed 17. 83, he told a reporter from the Daily Nation, remained. It was a sentence that would follow him for the rest of his life.
With his chilling accounts of murder, Kibera Senior Resident Magistrate Dickson Onyango read the sentence on behalf of his predecessor Margaret Kasera, who has since been transferred.
What followed was one of the strangest and most gruesome weeks in modern Kenyan history. Rather than deny his crime, Onyancha offered to lead police to them. Over the following days, investigators drove him from Nairobi out into Central Province and Rift Valley, tracing a map of horror that only he could draw. He led them to a house in Karen where he had once worked as a security guard, and up into its attic where the skeletal remains of a woman he'd chosen at random off the street were finally recovered. He led them to a water utility building nearby, to an exposed sewer drain where the long missing remain of Catherine Chelagat, gone for nearly 2 years by then, was finally identified. He walked officers into the same cramped, dingy lodging rooms in Thika where Helen Nyambura and Jacqueline Wambui had died, and calmly claimed responsibility for them. He seemed, witnesses said, to remember every detail as if the killing had happened days, not years before. Word spread through Nairobi and then the entire country within hours. Newspapers scrambled to describe a man nobody had ever heard of, reaching for the only reference point available. His soft, quiet manner and unreadable expression drew immediate and easy comparison to Ted Bundy. Reporters fixated on the tumor visible at the back of his skull, wondering aloud whether something physical or not just psychological lay behind what he'd done. Angry crowd began to gather everywhere the police convoy stopped. Some brandishing rope, some simply screaming, wanting nothing more than just to reach him before the law could. At his own home, a mob descended within hours of the news breaking, threatening to burn the house down. Only a fast police response kept it standing. His wife Lydia, who had known her husband as odd but never imagined this, read about it for the first time in a newspaper the next morning and by her own account, fainted where she stood. She fled that same day with her 2-year-old son back to her family's village in Western Kenya and never returned to the home they had shared. She later told a reporter simply that she felt sadder for the victim's family than for herself and that she prayed for them and apologized on her husband's behalf. If Onyancha's confession was true, it implied something almost as disturbing as the murder themselves, that somewhere out there, walking free, was the woman who had allegedly set this in motion. Investigators tracked down Elizabeth Wambui Kimani, a 40-year-old teacher who had taught Christian religious education at Kenyatta Mahiga High School during Onyancha's first years there, before transferring to another school in 1998. Days after Onyancha's arrest made headlines, she turned herself in to the police. She would spend the next 2 weeks in custody before being formally charged, not with murder, but with the narrower offense of administering an unlawful oath. According to Onyancha's account, Wambui had taken an inappropriate interest in him as a teenager student, inviting him to her home, drugging his food and drink, and while he was in a dulled, disoriented state, cutting his chest and drawing his blood before rubbing a black powder into the open wound. He claimed that from that point, she controlled him through what he called black magic, appearing in his dreams over the following years and eventually commanding him by 2006 to begin killing towards the cult's target of 100 victims. Wambui denied all of it, at first even denying she knew Onyancha at all, a claim police quickly disapproved through school records connecting the two. She was, by most description, an uncooperative and difficult witness during questioning, sometimes lapsing into long silence that investigators struggled to interpret. And it collapsed almost as quickly as it started because the prosecution's central witness, the only person who could substantiate the cult story at all, was Philip Onyancha himself. On the stand, he recanted. He testified that his earlier claims about Wambui were false. The magistrate acquitted her, noting that while some relationship clearly had existed between the two, there was no way to prove beyond reasonable doubt that any oath had been administered, let alone one intended to compel murder. Whatever had or hadn't happened at Kenyatta Mahiga High School in the 1990s, it will never be tested in a courtroom again. For a public desperate to understand where such evil had come from, it was a deeply unsatisfying ending. No cult was ever proven to exist. No conspiracy of killers was ever uncovered. Whatever had really happened to Philip Onyancha as a teenager, whether abuse, delusion, mental illness, manipulation, or some combination beyond easy naming, would remain in the most literal sense unanswered.
Because I remember one time I wanted these call-in radio stations, you call in the morning, you give out your problem. I wanted to call anonymously and actually come out and say, maybe this is what I've done. This is what I am. But I never had that courage. I lacked that courage to face up to my darker side. So it was a struggle.
With Wambui's case closed, prosecutors turned to building their case against Onyancha and his two alleged accomplices, Tobias Aradi and Douglas Obiero, for the kidnapping ring of the center of at least 18 separate murder allegations, spanning Nyeri, Nakuru, Thika, and Nairobi. It should have been, on paper, one of the most significant criminal trials in Kenya's history. Instead, it became something else entirely, a decade-long procedural tangle that tested every seam of the country's justice system. The first complication was Onyancha's mental state. Almost as soon as he appeared in court, his defense argued he was unfit to stand trial under ordinary criminal law. Prosecutors resisted, worried that a finding of insanity would functionally shield him from accountability altogether, and a judge initially agreed to let the case proceed under standard rules. Psychiatric panels were convened, first one, then a second, then a third, spread out across years, and their findings kept coming back troublingly consistent on one point. Even as they argued over diagnosis, Onyancha, they warned, remained dangerous and was likely to kill again if ever released. While the murder case crawled forward, an entirely separate matter reached a verdict far more quickly. Later in 2010, Onyancha stood trial in a Kibera court for the attempted rape and assault of an 18-year-old neighbor, an incident from February 2009 unconnected to the murder allegations, in which he'd attacked a young woman walking to a health center, dragging her into a nearby bushland before rangers intervened and rescued her. He was found guilty and sentenced to 12 years in prison, to be served given the severity of his other alleged crimes inside Kamiti Maximum Security Prison, one of the most secured facilities in East Africa. It was this conviction for a crime that was, relative to the murder he'd confessed to, almost a footnote that would end up defining the next 15 years of his life. Because while the murder cases dragged on, mistrial after mistrial,
appeal after appeal. Onyancha would spend that entire time behind Kamiti's walls, regardless. In 2018, the case took its most dramatic legal turn yet. A High Court judge, reviewing the tangled history of the prosecution, ruled that the entire earlier proceedings had been fundamentally flawed, that it should have been conducted under a specific section of Kenya's Criminal Procedure Code dealing with defendants suspected of mental illness rather than the ordinary section used. The judge found pointedly that prosecutors had at times seemed to actively suppress unfavorable psychiatric findings to keep the case moving forward as an ordinary murder trial. The result, years of proceedings were declared a mistrial. Onyancha and his co-accused would have to be tried again, essentially from scratch. 3 years later, in July 2001, one strand of that fresh effort reached a verdict, and it stunned the country. In the case concerning the 2008 death of Jacqueline Chepngetich Misoi, whose body had been found hanging in her Nairobi flat, the presiding judge acquitted Onyancha's outright. Not because she doubted a murder had occurred, she said plainly she believed Misoi likely had been killed, but because the original police investigation had been so poorly conducted from no evidence definitively tied Onyancha to the crime. A bloodstain on the victim's door had never been properly tested. Confession statements taken from Onyancha years earlier were ruled inadmissible, in part because he had reportedly been handcuffed while giving them, a violation, the court found, of his basic legal rights. The judge did not mince words about the quality of the original police work, calling out what she termed disheartening omission in the case file. A man who had confessed, on camera and in interviews, to more killings than almost anyone in the country's history, walked out of that particular courtroom a free man on that charge, not exonerated in any moral sense, but acquitted in the strict legal one, undone by the very investigators who had once paraded him triumphantly from crime scene to crime scene. Other murder charges against him remained open. As recently as 2003 and 2005, court records show proceedings still grinding forward in Kenya courts over further courts, including renewed fights over whether decade-old confession statements can even be admitted as evidence at all, with judges ordering fresh trial within a trial hearing just to determine if Onyancha's original words to police, spoken under disputed circumstances back in 2010, can be trusted by a court 15 years later. 15 years after his arrest, no jury or judge in Kenya has ever formally convicted Philip Onyancha of a single murder. And yet, somewhere behind all this, the mistrials, the psychiatric panels, the collapsing cases, a different story was unfolding inside the walls of Kamiti Maximum Security Prison, one that Kenyans found in some ways even harder to process than the killing themselves. Not long after his 2010 conviction in the rape charge, Onyancha underwent surgery to remove the tumor that had grown on the back of his skull, the same growth neighbors had noticed swelling for years before his arrest, and which some had wondered, without ever being able to prove it, might have played some role in the unraveling of his mind. Whatever changed in him after that, the surgery, the isolation, the years of confinement, or something else entirely, those who watched him inside Kamiti described a genuinely different man emerging. By 2016, prison officers and wardens were describing him almost disbelievingly as calm, disciplined, and well-behaved, a model prisoner by every internal measures the institution had. He was given responsibility as a bookkeeper in the prison's record officer, trusted with paperwork in a facility built to hold some of the country's most dangerous men. And in interviews given from inside the prison, first quietly, then increasingly publicly, Onyancha made an announcement that split Kenyan public opinion straight down the middle. He said he had become a born-again Christian. He said he had renounced the cult, the spirits, the blood, all of it. He began preaching to other inmates. Television crews, granted rare access to the prison during a New Year's outreach program, filmed him doing exactly that, standing in front of fellow prisoners, Bible in hand, delivering a sermon,
The once feared vampire of Kenya tabloid headlines now speaking of grace and forgiveness to men serving their own sentences beside him. In one recorded testimony, he described his conversion as the only beginning of something, addressing a prison ministry group with the favor of a man who genuinely believed he had been given a second chance he did not deserve. In separate interviews, Onyancha went further, offering something close to a public reckoning. He said he had never been born a killer, that he had been shaped and, in his telling, deliberately molded into one by the teachers he once accused. He asked directly for forgiveness from every family he had caused pain. He described his years of confession and legal turmoil as troubling and said he felt genuine relief in finally speaking the truth, whatever the cost to himself. It is, on its face, one of the more remarkable transformation stories to emerge from any prison anywhere. A man once nicknamed for drinking the blood of his victims, now leading Bible study for the men locked up alongside him. But in Kenya, understandably, has never been able to take that story entirely at face value. Psychiatric reports commissioned by the very same courts trying to determine his guilt kept returning the same uncomfortable conclusion even years into his supposed transformation, that Onyancha remained, in criminal terms, a significant risk to reoffend if he was ever released. Prosecutors worry of exactly this kind of redemption narrative playing out in the public eye while irregularities kept his actual guilt legally unresolved, fought for years to have him held indefinitely at the pleasure of the president, a legal mechanism reserved for defendants found dangerously mentally unwell, designed to keep him confined regardless of what any single trial concluded. Commentators drew an uneasy parallel to other killers whose prison charm had, in hindsight, turned out to be manipulation rather than genuine change. Men who won over wardens and psychiatrists alike, only to prove upon release that nothing fundamental inside them had shifted at all. Kenya has watched this story before elsewhere in the world and has no particular desire to test whether it will end the same way here. So the country has been left holding two irreconcilable images of the same man: the calm, self-possessed killer who once told a reporter without apparent distress that he still had 83 more people to kill, and the preacher years later standing before a room of fellow inmates telling them that grace exists even for a man like him. Nobody outside of Onyancha himself can say with any real confidence which one is real. It's entirely possible both are. As of the most recent court proceedings, Philip Onyancha remains in custody at Kamiti Maximum Security Prison, despite periodic false rumors and social media claims to the contrary that Kenyan fact checkers have had to repeatedly knock down. He is still technically a man on trial rather than a convicted murderer, more than 15 years after his arrest, with at least one murder case against him still winding through Nairobi's courts as recently as 2025, tangled in fresh disputes over whether his original 2010 confession can even be legally used against him. His wife, Lydia, never returned to Nairobi. His accomplices, Tobias Aradi and Douglas Obiero, remain co-defendants in a case that had outlived multiple judges, multiple prosecutors, and for a stretch, the ordinary rules of Kenyan criminal procedure itself. The teacher he once named as his co-raptor was tried, acquitted, and largely vanished from public record. Most of his victims' family have waited more than a decade and a half for a conviction that, as of this telling, has still never come. What Onyancha's case leaves behind isn't really a resolution. It is a set of open, uncomfortable questions that Kenya has been forced to sit with for a generation. How does a justice system built for ordinary crime handle a defendant whose own mind may be genuinely broken and who might simultaneously be dangerous, remorseful, mentally ill, and manipulative all at once? Manipulative all at once without any of those things cancelling the others out. What do you do with a confession that horrifies a nation but can't survive the basic legal safeguards meant to protect everyone, including the guilty, from coerced testimony? And what does it mean morally, spiritually, legally, when a man once accused of murdering nearly 20 people spends a decade and a half preaching redemption to other prisoners, while the families of the people he says he killed are still waiting for a court to simply say, officially, what happened to their daughters, their sons, their mothers? Kenya has never fully agreed on an answer. Perhaps it never will. Philip Onyancha remains, in the fullest sense of the word, unresolved, a case still open, a man still waiting for judgment, somewhere between the killer he confessed to being and the preacher he now claims to be.